Hello, welcome to Power of 10, a show about design operating at many levels of Zoom, from thoughtful detail through to transformation in organization, society, and the world. My name's Andy Pillane. I'm a design leadership coach, educator, and writer. My guests today are Josh Clark and Veronika Kindred, co-authors of the book Sentient Design, Crafting Intelligent Interfaces with AI, soon to be published by Rosenfeld Media. Josh is principal of Big Medium, a digital agency that helps complex organizations design for what's next. Josh has over 30 years of experience in emerging technology, user experience, and design innovation. His projects include future-friendly interfaces for AI, connected devices, and websites for many of the world's biggest companies. And a thing I did not know, in 1996, Josh created the Couch to 5K, the C25K running program, which has helped millions of skeptical would-be exercisers take up the running. We can talk about this afterwards.
I'm meanwhile going from 5K to couch. It seems to be my trajectory.
That's the new program.
Yeah.
Veronika Kindred is a designer and researcher at Big Medium, where she defines and solves design problems alongside some of the world's biggest companies. She travels internationally to lead sentient design workshops and speak to teams at startups and Fortune 100 companies alike. Her research has ranged from AI's effect on user experience to mobile technology's impact on African political engagement to the nuances of congressional climate hearings. And she's also Josh's daughter. Sorry, Veronika, no escaping that one. Both of you, welcome to Power of 10.
Thanks, Andy. So good to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I always know that introduction is coming, the father-daughter stuff, and it gets me blushing every time.
Oh, yeah, I can see. You know, it's a nice thing. We'll talk about it in a minute, actually, of the experience of writing a book together like this. But first of all, I'd love to hear a bit more about yourself and your journey, as I've given you a bit in the intro. Veronika, tell me about your journey from where you are now, or from where you were to where you are now.
Yeah, so I studied political science and data science when I was at college, at university. And I interned for Josh one summer, and that was fun. And then when it was like about time to graduate, I was kind of thinking that it would be a really great career to embark on. You know, I enjoyed my summer internship at the family business. And so I was excited about continuing. So I started right after I graduated. That was in 2023. So this was also right after OpenAI had dropped ChatGPT. That was the fall of 2022. So the end of my schooling had LLMs as a big part of it. And certainly my entire career has had LLMs be a big part of it. And so, yeah, I've just been doing client work. And then we started writing this book about 2 years ago. So that's been my career thus far.
Well, okay. So there was actually going to be a question about this, which was, the book is about to come out, right? It's imminent.
Yes,
we're recording in the beginning of May, 2026. And so you started writing it in 2024, did you?
Yes, yeah. I feel like almost maybe June 2024, almost exactly 2 years. Yeah.
Right, okay. Now we'll come back to that point, I think. And Josh, you are well known on the interwebs, but tell us a bit more about your journey.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've been doing interaction design for about 30 years, as you mentioned, and running Big Medium, the digital agency, for 25 of that time. And so, Andy, you know, you and I are of there that kind of came up together. And when we were Veronika's age, this thing didn't really exist as a career as we know it. Obviously, HCI did, but it's it is a really different animal. And so I think my career has been about trying to see the coming and emerging waves and helping organizations adapt to those. So first it was around the web and the Web 2.0 era, and then profoundly mobile through kind of the DevOps revolution of design systems, and now into AI. And, you know, I think there is a good and a bad of having all of this experience. Veronika is very fresh in her career, obviously 3 years in right now compared to my 30. And Veronika, you don't have my experience yet, but you're also not burdened by it. And I think that at moments like this, when we have these seams where there are new interaction paradigms to explore, in some ways, the best practices and norms that we've adopted from previous waves sometimes blind us to what's possible. So I could not have written this book without Veronika. Because there were constantly times where it's like, wow, this breaks the mold, hang on. And she's like, this is how software always should have behaved. Let's push farther. And I think this difference of coming up with algorithmic feeds, with machine learning mediated interfaces, just, growing up with that, but then coming into the field with that as an expectation brings a freshness and perspective that I, as a veteran, really needed. I think this is a moment, these kinds of moments like we're confronting now, where design is changing and the form of what we make is changing, really demands new perspectives. And I think one of the cool things about this particular technology is that it really allows and encourages that.
Yeah, we are kind of peers in that sense of when we started, the roles weren't defined. I was sort of multimedia person. I actually remember calling myself an interactive designer, but there wasn't that interaction designer. I think IA was one of the first things that emerged actually as a kind of this is a discipline. But there was graphic designers who were doing the UI stuff and programmers, but it was still evolving. One of the things I really enjoyed about that era was the kind of shared exploration of what are the affordances of this medium, right? Not of this particular widget or the interface thing, but what does it mean to be able to interact with stuff now? And it kind of went away as, I guess, digital and product design sort of became operationalized. Veronika, when you obviously bringing that, it reminds me actually of my niece, who's I should know how old she is, but she's 29, 30. And I remember her being really surprised when she saw a telephone that had a cable, because she'd grown up with cordless phones, like they were sort of cordless, like fixed line phones, but cordless phones or mobile phones. And so the idea that you'd have a phone that's got a kind of curly wire going to it was kind of really weird for her. I remember this when she was kind of very young. Is there anything from, when Josh pulls out his old photographs of when the internet was black and white, was there anything that you sort of heard and thought, oh my God, that's really interesting, I did not know that?
That's a great question. Writing this book, I did kind of do like a lot of research just into like kind of the history of AI and also like some of the history of design. I think that this is probably older than Josh, so I don't want to date him to this, but just the traditional command line interaction, just like going in terminal. I think it's so unintuitive and so cumbersome, and obviously like it came from a place of need and it was wildly innovative at the time, but I think now technology is so accessible from basically any standpoint, whether it's voice to text or a cursor or using your gaze, or there's just so many ways to interact with and kind of get what you want from a digital interface. I think just like going back to the very start of it, it's one, I think amazing to see like how far it's come in a relatively short amount of time. And also the kind of, I think maybe we take for granted now how easy it is to interact across so many modals.
That's very true.
And now here we are kind of going back temporarily, I presume, to really kind of command line interfaces is somehow sort of the state of the art question mark.
Right.
I think that there's like so much opportunity beyond that. But I mean, like Veronika, we were like looking at like Zork text adventures games from the 70s, which was my kind of childhood sort of first games. And like we were struck looking back at it at just how hard it was for the system to understand what you
get it right.
meant. That you had to use very brittle, if you didn't say get hammer and you said pick up hammer, doesn't know what you're talking about.
No idea.
So like part of the game was like figuring out what word to use. And it's like, look at how we've fast forwarded now to these systems effortlessly understand intent, no matter what slang or language you use. That problem that was so hard and vexing for decades, now it's like, wow, LLMs just get what you mean, certainly with sort of text language, but can also infer a lot from other types of context too, which is groundbreaking in what becomes possible for interaction design.
That's true. Yeah, so there was a bit actually in where you talk about ephemeral experiences, and then and I was thinking, which is these things that they, well, maybe you can describe what ephemeral experiences are, and then I'll carry on with my point after that.
Sure, yeah. When we talk about ephemeral experiences, it is, an experience that's invented for the moment and may never be seen again. So it's something that, I think that we're seeing some of these things, and this is actually how we open the book, is with the so-called world model, which has strong implications for games, certainly. But what we're talking about is seed a model with an image and a prompt, just a static image, and it can create an entire world that you explore, invented frame by frame. So until you turn in this direction, that part of the world didn't exist, and it won't exist for anybody else. And so there's like this, and it feels totally natural for you in the moment. You may not be able to find your way back there again because it's so ephemeral and invented for the moment, and you may not be able to share it. So I think one of the things that's interesting is like, oh, this kind of thing is possible. What if any type of digital experience could be created this way? What if websites were generated this way? But also and I think that there are obvious utility to that. It's like, oh, the thing that I want and need in the moment just appears. There's also problems with it, so when is this going to be something that is ungrounding? When does it block collaboration? And so with all of these things that are possible, I think we have to kind of say, how much do we crank the dial?
Yeah.
And what are the contexts and moments to use this awareness and radical adaptability that's now possible so that it is actually tuned to the moment and feels intuitive instead of like a robot fever dream just rolling out randomly in front of me.
Do robots dream of electric sheep? So I think it's a good time to say, actually, the book is not a book of like how to use AI in your design process and in your workflow and stuff. The book's really a very, very thoughtful look at what does it mean to be designing these things and for these things and using these elements in interfaces and in interaction paradigms, rather than, this is how you get Claude to, pre-bake your stuff.
Yeah, that's right. There's been like so much of a focus on efficiency and process in bringing AI into people's works and that into people's work. And that makes a lot of sense. It's, a lot about it's kind of like the first level, I think, is like, okay, great. Now we have this very powerful tool. How can we do things faster or easier? And just that huge focus on efficiency, which is not particularly creative. Like, it's a very engineering focused view on integrating AI into work. Yeah. It's very much like a kind of input and output based scenario. And so what our book is really about is focused on the new kinds of experiences that people can create and the new kinds of products that are possible, the new kind of interfaces.
Yeah, this is what, for me, reminds me of those early days of interactive media. It's got two sides to it. It's a sort of double-sided thing, which is not just these things help you create the stuff, which is what all the sort of multimedia programs like Director and Flash did, but also it's embedded in the stuff you put out there. And what does that mean? Why is it important? And I think it's a really, really important conversation to be having, because generally it's like, oh, now we can do more of the same stuff we're already doing faster. And that's, I feel like, a massively lost opportunity, because it's a different paradigm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to come back to the ephemeral experiences thing, though, because there was this thing that when I was thinking about it, I had the same video game thing as you. And one of the things that we all did, so I studied film and video. I wanted to be a film director originally. And one of the things we all did was try to make interactive stories straight away when we were using Director. And you get this exponential branching path problem, right? Where very, very quickly you can take a choice of, go left or right, and then you can take another choice. And because it's a branching thing, you only need Well, 8-bit is 256, right? And there's only 8 decision points. And then when you get to 16, you're in thousands of them, and it becomes impossible to pre-make all the assets and everything like that, because we didn't have the tools or the technology to do that generative thing. But one of the things of thinking about interactivity in a different way was, hey, what you do is you write the rules for an interactive system. And this is what we did with a lot of our stuff. And there is no sort of pre-baked choose your own adventure type thing. We made a thing and you interact with it. You kind of play with it. We talked about play an awful lot. That's what my whole PhD was about. And it's a very different way of thinking. It's the difference between placing each blade of grass and writing the rules for grass. And I immediately started thinking of video games. And I also play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a dungeon master. And so my job is to kind of improvise the story, and I create a set of scenarios, if you like, and loosely linked, but we don't know each session how the story is going to unfold because it's collaboratively made. And there's this whole aspect of that I started thinking about as well. And also, I don't know if you ever, MUDs. Did you ever play MUDs, the multi-user dungeons thing? So there was, and Muse.
I did, yeah. I was in the early 90s, desperately addicted to a game called Moral Decay, where I played a disco dancing ogre capitalist. We had a whole syndicate.
And now you're living in Moral Decay. It's amazing.
That's it. So I was well prepared. Veronika, we'll have to put aside Zork.
But in those multi-object oriented dungeons, so they were for people who don't know, they were like a text-based and then a kind of chat-based space you could go into. And there was a I can't remember the famous one actually now. But you go into these spaces and you could be given a space. Like you could design your space and you could design the objects and you could program the objects in your space. And so given the different commands that people would, and you could give an object a thing. I remember the rumor mill, and you could crank the rumor mill and it would spit out some kind of random rumor about it was a community. So it was a kind of like a chat room basically, but it had this idea of like a mental space that you were in that you could program. And so a lot of this started to kind of all come together with me. I'm like, oh, okay, I can see how that's sort of come really full circle in the chat, prompt-based interface, in setting up those rules. And I've kind of found it really kind of fascinating that now we've finally got there. And obviously video games got there earlier in terms of generative landscapes and stuff, as you were saying before. So there is a whole bunch of stuff that I sometimes feel that the last 10, 15 years of product design have been like this. There's not been necessarily, it's obviously been progress, but it's almost been like a little divergent fork that now we're kind of, a branch that we're kind of coming back into of the exploration of interactive media. And that's really got that sense reading your book of all the different ways of thinking about this. That brought me home in a way to sort of like 20 years or 30 before. I think it's really fascinating.
It's great to hear. I think these moments, in sort of the modern computing era have come around only about every 15 years. And the last one was with mobile, where it was, here is something that is categorically different and wants to be different from previous computing experiences. And it takes a while to figure out, right? It took us a while to figure out, Uber is a thing that is uniquely empowered by mobile, or, Instagram type experiences, TikTok, a camera driven experience. And now we're in this moment with AI and we're rusty as an industry. To your point, the last 10 or 15 years have been a bit of a divergence. Once we sort of sorted mobile, the focus of the design industry, the innovation has been almost entirely in design operations. And how do large companies metabolize design and make it fit into the structure of design at scale? And so a lot of the focus and innovation has been around design systems, with sometimes some unintended consequences, frankly, of making design a production element, of focused on those blades of grass almost exclusively, rather than thinking about what could the landscape be. And so I think that right now we're in a place that is very much, as Veronika was saying, focused on tooling and process. And I'm surprised, but patient, that more of the design industry has been more interested in. What happens if we take the intelligence from our tools and weave them into the interface to make extraordinary experiences that were not possible before, but can bring enormous value to both business and customer?
Why? I mean, I'd love to hear both your views from sort of either end. I'll start with you, Veronika. I say either end, I mean either end of the sort of generation, I guess. Why do you think it is that? Because I agree, right? So I wrote actually, I think the other day I saw it was my best performing post on LinkedIn of all time. So it was something like, big tech has has suffered from a massive lack of imagination. And I really kind of felt that everything looks the same, as that wind tunnel effect of everything just homogenizing. And in some respects, it's great, right? I'm glad that I can use like gov.uk's great design system and get my passport renewed in, it takes me 20 minutes to do it rather than hours of filling in forms and stuff. And that I know how everyone knows how checkouts work, and that's sort of by and large a solved problem. There's a whole lot of broken services, though, out there still. Why do you think, Veronika, that this hasn't been more explored, that this conversation isn't more present?
Yeah, that's a great question. To get very meta, I wonder if, the past 10, 15 years have been very influenced by who's hiring. I think a lot of people have gone in-house, and large enterprises have really expanded their in-house teams. And I think especially like post-COVID, agencies have shrunk, or not as many are around anymore. And I wonder if that has influenced the kind of work and community building within the design community itself, whereas designers don't have as many kind of third spaces as they once did.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm a design Nepo baby, so I remember going to conferences like 10 years ago when I was a kid, and there's just not as many anymore. They're just not around as much. And so I wonder if in that loss of community, we've also lost some of the exploration of the industry and the curiosity. And also, like, if you're a designer on a team and maybe there's one other designer and you're in-house and it's a very siloed organization, you're not necessarily going to feel very empowered to advocate for the more curious or imaginative option. So I think all of those reasons have really contributed, which is, those are all still problems that are still happening and still around, and people, it's a tremendously volatile time. So I think it makes a lot of sense that people want to be in-house and have that kind of stability. But I think it is still important for us to take it upon ourselves to really push for that exploration.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's very true. I mean, Josh, you will know, as someone who runs an agency, that when clients come and say, we want something really new and innovative, that's not actually what they want, right?
No, that's right. I think everyone kind of comes in saying, we want an industry-leading solution. Which is not an unreasonable thing to say. But quickly, when you get into it, in many cases, the conversation is, well, what is the competitive set doing? Well, wait, what's the best practice here? And you realize that, a lot of people just want to be industry standard, which, by the way, is fine. I mean, I think that risk is sometimes overvalued in our culture, especially the technology culture. Safety makes total sense in certain areas. But it's good to know what you want and who you are and in what areas you're prepared to take a risk. I think large organizations are designed to reduce risk and increase predictability, except in very specific areas where they believe they can excel and beat the competition. And often that is not in interaction design. And so I think that this next era of design, when, as I said, design has been metabolized into the culture of organizations that are designed to reduce risk, which means reducing innovation, that there's going to be sort of a vanguard of organizations and products that really show us what's possible. And as those things become settled and safe, that will frame the next generation and things will follow. I mean, which is not, some grand observation. There's always sort of a leading vanguard of adopters that pave the way and make the early mistakes. But I think one of the things that we've seen is that there's been enough of those in the couple of years that we've been writing this book that we can see the shapes emerging. And I think there's still plenty to invent. But one of the things that we wanted to really focus on in sentient design is to identify the emerging archetypes of experience that go way beyond text-based chat and text-based agent to what happens when you put intelligence into a wide variety of interfaces. We talked about ephemeral experiences, dashboards or websites that build themselves. But you can also have agents show up as other users in an experience, for example, in a multiplayer experience, which changes the nature of it. And you're not just doing text-based chat off to the side. All to say is that, look, it might seem crazy to try to write a book about AI right now. It is such a fascinating technology.
Especially a physical book, and lock it down into, let's print some more stuff on paper.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to really do that with intention, that this is not about the latest tools, the latest models, the latest prompt strategy. It is about, we really wanted to write a book that would be useful in 5 or maybe, 10 years, of identifying archetypes and ways to think about new postures that these systems can take toward the user. And we think that will be lasting. I think one of the things that's reassuring is like our initial ideas 2 years ago still hold up, even as much as the underlying technology has changed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is going to be tooting my own horn a little bit, but I kind of look back on some bits of my PhD, which I wrote. I think I finished it in 2014, I can't remember. But there were bits of that, and actually even sort of the very first anti-ROM stuff, our kind of interactive thing that we made. There's bits of that, and I look at that now, and I still enjoy this. Some of this is actually, it still makes sense. And that's partly what I meant, I think, by this kind of return to, as much as it sounds a bit highfalutin, but sort of an intellectual inquiry around what does this stuff mean, and how what are the shapes of it? Because the iPhone brought sort of multi-touch to the masses, but there hasn't really been an interaction paradigm shift since multi-touch, right? And part of also the iPhone was that it did a very clever trick of putting the phone, making the phone bit as an app, because it's turned it from being a phone that had some other stuff to being this blank thing that whatever app you opened is the sort of very ephemeral in that sense, that whatever app you opened, it became the thing, right? It fills the screen, it becomes the thing.
Right. And the phone was everyone's least favorite app on the thing, the one that they wanted to avoid as much as possible.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting to see that whole sort of multi-app sort of on one screen thing has never really been solved very well on the iPad, for example. It's kind of one of the clunkiest bits of I would say, Apple's UI design, having some multiple apps open at once, because it just works really well. This idea of like, this piece of glass is my banking app when I'm in the banking app. This piece of glass is now my email app, and all the rest of it. So in the book, you use the word postures just now. You've got this sentient triangle. You've got these different kind of aspects of the kind of experiences you can have, and you've got these 4 postures that you've come up with. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, yeah. So the four postures that we mentioned are tools, chat, agents, and co-pilots, which, as we looked at kind of the broad range of AI experiences out in the world and emerging, these were kind of the 4 categories of postures, or kind of the stance that the system takes towards the user. And really, we made the sentient triangle because we thought there was a need to map out these postures and these categories and really provide a framework for the kinds of experiences that are emerging and that people are encountering. And it's just been a really great way, even for us as we do our own work, to really consider the needs of the task we're trying to accomplish and its suitability versus the capabilities that are available.
When we think about the postures, and Veronika, I think you said it really well, that it's the stance that the system takes toward the user, where tools are these very traditional experiences. Give an input, get an output. You use tools. Whereas chat is this turn-based exchange with a peer, is the experience of it, where you do something, the system responds. We think of chat as like dialogue and often as text, but it doesn't have to be. We're trying to take the the definition of the chat posture to be more metaphorically conversational, where it's like, I do something, the system responds, I respond to that. And like a conversation, you and the system shape the course of this journey in ways that can't always be predicted and are unique to this pairing. Agents, of course, you delegate to agents, they go off and do things. And co-pilots sit in the background and wait for their moment to help in specific circumstances. Really different models to think about things. And then, as Veronika said, an explosion of specific experience patterns emerge within these and their overlaps.
It's hard to describe this in words. I'm looking at it now, and I'll put it up on the website. But there is, or link to it too, because I was kept thinking, well, you've got three things here. Why don't you just have a Venn diagram? But I can see that, while co-pilots would sit in the middle of that, you've sort of fenced off. You've done actually within the triangle of grounded, interoperable, and radically adapted. You've got these other little triangles, and I see why you've kind of fenced off certain bits too. So a Venn diagram presumably wouldn't work. I'm really interested in that thing you just said though around the turn-based, but not only a gaming paradigm as well. But I mean, I've often talked about this is the PhD thing, actually. We talked about this kind of action-reaction feedback loop of interaction, right? That you can have a thing. And if you make an interactive installation, for example, there's usually some kind of attractor loop, as they call it on like poker machines and video games. But there's a thing that, someone walks past a thing and it reacts to in some way. There's usually some cameras, a motion tracking thing, and it reacts. And then the passerby reacts. And then the thing responds, and then then they start playing together, right? And then that's what we're always looking for, to try and kind of pull people in to something like that. And I noticed how my push always against the sort of HCI thing a little bit was that it was very, very task based, right? It was very much around, this person's trying to achieve a thing and do a task, and let's give them a tool to do that task as efficiently as possible. There wasn't much playfulness in it at all. And yet, I really feel that the kind of playfulness of that, and you see the way people interact with, ChatGPT and Claude, it's more than just functional. Right? There's definitely some play in there. And they are, I guess, programmed, or they are trained to lean into that a little bit too. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting thing of like, how do you use personality and playfulness in a way that doesn't lean too hard into anthropomorphism, which we see some of the both opportunities and this very strong risks of that in these assistant patterns like ChatGPT and Claude. And I think one of the things that is useful, I think, when we think about, what is intelligence? We go naturally to human models of intelligence, or machines that can talk or that have human personality. And I think one of the things is you can have that kind of playfulness that you're talking about, in the physical environment of the examples you're giving, in the digital environment as well, without having to be human style intelligence. I don't know. I mean, Veronika, I think that one of our big aha moments was when we were making a toy that we called Sentient Scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we built this toy called Sentient Scenes. Yeah, it started out as just a toy, but I think it's a good example of a lot of what Josh was talking about. It's basically a little web app that you can put in a prompt in a chat box, and the browser kind of takes on the design of what you've put into the chat box. So if you type something like HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, the whole browser kind of changes its mood so that there's like a red floating orb, and it kind of takes that style on. And we've realized that in that way, experiences can take on things like style and mood and tone and personality without necessarily pretending to be human. Like, you would never look at a moody browser and be like, oh, you would just never infer friendship or any type of relationship from that experience, even though you're still able to capture that tone.
Matt Webb, who also sort of like created the original triangle diagram that we riffed off of for the Sentient triangle, has always been like really interesting about like suggesting alternate intelligences as models. He likes to use dolphins, for example. And I think it's helpful to remember, it's like, oh, right, there are all kinds of intelligence in the world when we look at anything from ants to elephants to dolphins to dogs to trees or mushrooms. There's a kind of a community intelligence in all of these things that are really different from our own, but that we recognize as intelligent organization. And taking some of that, of being like, oh, how can we make this aware and responsive as an experience, but not try to make it act like your new BFF.
Yeah, and that lets you slightly off the hook of the sentient thing that we talked about this on LinkedIn in the comments once when you I think when you first started writing the book or started talking about it, and because I had this, I have a little bit of a kind of. I don't know what I want to say. It's not an ick thing, but I have a kind of, when we talk about these things as sentient, because as we know, they're not, right? They're not self-aware. They don't really, agents do, but they don't just do things on their own behalf without some kind of input from a human at the beginning, even if it's just the initial nudge. And I know there'll be hundreds of people out there going, oh, yes, but once you send the agents off to do stuff, then they are. My view of it is there's always humans at either end, right? However much tech you put in the way, there's still humans at either end of it. But I think it's really important to remember that these things they're not really sentient in that sense, but that kind of sense of, I would say, aware of the other or aware of the context is perhaps maybe what you're describing. And displaying a mood, at least, I think, is perhaps I learned the other day that chameleons do not change their color to camouflage themselves. It's based on their mood. And then I started thinking, well, what color is a chameleon? And it made me think of that when I was kind of reading or listening to you kind of think about, talking about that there's that sense of like a response that's almost like an instinctual response. I don't know how much a chameleon, because none of us do, or a squid or any of those, or octopus, any of those things that change their colors, kind of go, well, I'm feeling angry, I'm going to switch on the red, or whether it's just like blushing, right, or something else. So there's a kind of instinctual response that's hardwired into it, which feels to me perhaps a more appropriate way of describing the kind of intelligence that's going on. And I had a thing the other day. I was getting Claude to look at a website, as I said, for the university I work for and stuff. And and I said, and who teaches service design? And he just came up with some name. I thought, oh, that's weird. Well, that's not me. So, and I looked up this guy, and he's a design professor in Hong Kong School of Design. And I had said to Claude, well, what happened there? And it went, well, no, I couldn't actually find anything. And so because I couldn't find any information, I just made something up. Right. And
the very definition of Frankfurt's bullshit, right? Sort of like the original essay that what bullshit is not someone or something, in this case, intentionally lying, but what happens when you are expected to give an answer and don't know it?
Yeah,
bullshit happens.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not an attempt to mislead. It is simply following through on the performance.
Yeah.
And that is what large language models are. So, what's interesting is we've got this technology that can take and understand any kind of open-ended input, like we were talking about, versus like the early Zork days. Yeah. Total game changer. It can understand what you mean. And expert at manner, it can, and I don't mean just tone or style, but format, just the output can change and be really nimble.
Yeah.
Really bad at facts, but plays well with others enough to know how to ask for those facts of other systems. And so what all that means is like, oh, we shouldn't treat these things like databases or search engines, which is our previous model of computing, or really rules-based systems. But this actually is perfect for managing the presentation layer because they understand what you mean, can be nimble in their presentation, and know where to go elsewhere for answers if you make sure that they know that they're supposed to. And so it's the kind of thing of like, oh, we keep trying to fit this technology into a hole that looks like what came before with deterministic systems, and we're frustrated, but they were never built to do that. Hallucinations are a feature, not a bug, in terms of how this technology was created. And so but oh my gosh, for manner and presentation, they are great for that. And so that's what I think is really exciting about the sentient design concept. It's like, oh, the intelligence can be used for understanding and presentation in new ways while traditional systems handle the facts.
There's a section it's right at the end, I think, of the book where you talk about the sentient design sprint and this idea of a minimal magical product. Which I really liked because it's, for me, you just go through these different things. And again, for me, it was all like, how can we make these things more playful? You call it magical, right? Can you describe it a little bit, the idea of it?
Yeah, sure. The idea of the minimum magical product is the idea that you can first start by thinking about a magic wish. So this draws on kind of the idea of the Internet of Things, and so this draws on the idea of David Rose's idea of enchanted objects, and just the idea that in the Internet of Things, objects became kind of imbued with magic. And so it borrows on that thinking where we think about, okay, if we have a problem, what would be the magical solution to that problem? If anything were possible, what could we do? And it kind of works back from there. Obviously, there's dangers of thinking of technology like magic because technology has real costs. But if you work backward from that idea of magical thinking, you can really get to the heart of the desire. So you can really, before you load yourself down with logistics, really kind of load up on the core of the want. And then once you've kind of distilled it down to that core, you can add in process and logistics and actual capabilities. And then you've ideally come out with something that is a bit magical just in the beginning stages of its thinking.
Yeah, we have this exercise called practical magic, which is exactly what Veronika is describing, where we find it really helpful in emerging technologies because it helps to prevent immediate solutioning with kind of a technology-led solution. And so the goal of this is not to pretend that AI or any technology is in fact magic, but it is the kind of thing that really, when you get to what a magic wish is, it is like, oh, I wish there was a shortcut to this thing. You know, when I look in my magic mirror and I want to be able to see my aura of health, you know, it's like I want to be able to sort of see how I'm actually feeling underneath my skin, for example.
Yeah.
We can't do that. The technology can't do that. But we can kind of go backwards and be like, well, so what is possible? You know, one of the early ad campaigns for Uber, and it's a marketing campaign, but I think it gets at it, was the next best thing to teleportation. And it's true, you know, it's like, do not get in the teleportation machine, folks. Like, that technology is not ready. But the next best thing is being able to summon a car that knows exactly where you're going in the fastest route. And it's like, oh, all right, you know, that was a marketing thing. But what if we started with that? It's like, I want to teleport. All right, we can't do that. What is the analog kind of proxy for that magical wish? Helps at a moment like this to sort of think through, get in touch with not how people should do things, but what they want to get done. And then you can think about, like Veronika was saying, how does today's technology help us get us closer there than yesterday's technology to that very user-focused want?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think there's a thing here around metaphors, actually, because obviously, you know, all of our user interfaces have some kind of metaphors, and if people know Lakoff and Johnson's book of metaphors we live by, it's a sort of classic for this. And you know, I'm looking at my desktop here, and there's a waste bin, you know, and I pull there's that weird thing where now they've changed the icon actually when you do it, but you used to have to pull your hard drive into the waste bin to kind of eject it. And there's always that moment of like, oh, that doesn't seem right to me to be doing that. Am I going to delete it? And obviously, you're not really pulling a file into a waste bin. You're just, that triggers a command to delete a file from the system at its really underlying level. And
there are no files.
There are no files.
There are no
files.
Directories. It's just like magnetic signals.
Exactly. Somewhere there is a magnetic signal changes the state of some electrons, and yet, so sometimes, people get really wrapped up in the metaphor, and it has to be exactly right. And I remember someone doing a kind of prototype of a 3D desktop. And I think, the metaverse was exactly this, which is, so we've got this meeting space. And I was like, wow. And people who are not in the metaverse can dial in. I was like, yeah, but you've made a 3D conference room with two big kind of Cisco screens at the end. You could have done anything, right? You could be meeting in Mark Zuckerberg's hair, or you could have done anything. You chose a really sort of ugly kind of meeting room, and you just took that metaphor and just sort of copy and pasted it. But I'm always fascinated by metaphors or by interaction paradigms that seem very natural, but actually aren't. I mean, the stretching and zooming photos on, you're making that pinching, you're wiping your fingers across a pane of glass. There's no analog to that in real life, and yet it feels very intuitive. Or the same as that kind of mode. I can't remember what it's called now. On Apple's desktop, where you can kind of look at all your files. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called now.
I just want to press the button. I don't.
You press the button. You press the button, and it shows you all your files, and then you can go, oh yeah, that one. You've got loads of windows open and stuff. And that's a thing that also doesn't exist in real life. But the magic wish of I've got a whole load of stuff and clutter on my desk, and I don't know where it is. What I'd really like to be able to do is have it all sort of hover in the air and choose a thing, and then it all kind of goes back and goes into its pile. That, I think, is one of the reasons why that works. And so I think you're definitely onto a thing where there's a magic metaphor or something like that. And there are things that feel like they would make sense if only you could kind of do it, versus then a very practical real world metaphor where you can kind of paint yourself into a corner and go, well, we can't do that because desktops don't do that, or whatever.
But I think you're right. It's like we can prematurely limit our imaginations by trying to tie it too heavily to physical metaphor. I mean, obviously the desktop has been very enduring in software design, but also in just how we've done digital stuff before. And I think at moments like this, giving yourself the permission to think a little crazy. Most of our consulting engagements now have some period of what we call mad science, where we just try to shake it out a little bit of being like, let us think about what is newly possible. Because sometimes AI can fulfill that magic wish directly now, just in terms of being like, oh, I can understand anything that I say and the meaning behind it. Like that is computing magic. Like it's kind of amazing how quickly we've begun to take that for granted. That is something that we've been pursuing for decades and suddenly became possible. That's magic. It's magic in the Arthur C. Clarke sense of it. That's right. Yeah. But let's not be too carried away. I think there's a real tendency right now to overpromise and overassume what the technology can do. So our responsibilities as designers is to constantly be playing and understanding what the tolerances are and what really serves customers and business and isn't just a magic trick, a novelty. We aren't here to build novelty, although I think it's important to play with novelty to understand what the material can do.
There's a whole section of the book of what could possibly go wrong, and looking at the dark side of things here. We talk about it a little bit. I'm conscious of the time, but it's also sort of very present. If you were to kind of distill one or two things out of that, though, what would be the key principles, if you like?
Yeah, so it's a tricky topic, and I think a very emotional one. There's so much fear and anxiety. I think people know pretty innately like what could go wrong. Like we feel it all the time, and it's in the news a lot. So I think what I would want to say is that I think there is room for a lot to go right if we really keep our eye on the ball of what could go wrong. I don't necessarily have trust in the people or companies driving these technologies. And thus I think it's really, really important to pay very close attention to what they're doing and to stay really engaged. And so I would say that if anyone has fear or anxiety about this technology and about what could happen or what feels like is happening, to stay very engaged and to get involved, because I think now is a really great opportunity to have a ton of influence about how this technology gets implemented into our lives, especially as designers. I think really kind of heeding that call of what's possible and getting involved right now will have a very, very lasting impact for a long time in the digital world.
Yeah, I keep thinking of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, that bit in Fantasia. I think it's in Fantasia, right, with Mickey Mouse, and he's getting the mops and the buckets to kind of clean up for him, so he doesn't actually have to do the work and wash up, and then it just gets out of control, and he can't do anything until the sorcerer comes back and puts a stop to it. And it feels to me, if we keep on the magic thing, that's a key aspect, right? And I feel one of the things that about your book is it elevates the thinking about this to beyond the stuff we were talking at the beginning. It's not just a kind of process thing. It's not just about doing stuff faster. It's not just about sticking it into absolutely everything and putting little sparkles on to indicate it, but that it's actually forces you to think about, well, what is this thing? What does it mean? What is it? What are the paradigms that this could be? And at least I would like to think that if you're already thinking like that, you also, the next question or the earlier question is, and how could this go wrong? What is the worst case scenario for this? I feel this is one of the roles of design. Mark Curtis said this about, in movies like Shrek, or you've got Donkey, or, the guide by the side, or the sidekick, or the mentor is obviously often there to ask the uncomfortable questions of the protagonist and sort of push back in the ways that force them to change. Right? Dory in Finding Nemo. That part of our job in that desire to kind of put it everywhere and people won't do that. And to ask those difficult questions, and if the answer is, we don't think people will do that, then the answer is always no, there's going to be someone who does that. But I think it's partly our job is to actually ask those uncomfortable truths or uncomfortable questions to force the conversation. And I think it's a bit of a balancing trick for design, because we run the risk also of just being discounted and ignored because we're just this kind of irritant, like we have been with sort of, what about the human? What about the customer? What about the user? And we've sort of often done that at the expense of talking about what's also good for the businesses that are employing us. But I do feel it's still an important conversation to be had. And one of the things we can do, and I guess everyone could do now, is show it, right? You used to be one of the Achilles heels of design and proving its sort of ROI was we, in our heads, extrapolated into the future and decided not to do a thing. And so the ROI is that you didn't do the thing that would have been a bad thing in the future. And because you can't really sort of prove this hypothetical future bad scenario didn't happen. Whereas now you can actually, you can prototype the bad thing, right? And I think sometimes it's really useful to go the other way and go, well, let's prototype the worst case scenario, and because then you can show and not tell.
Right. Although I will say some of my experience of being like, let's just show them how terrible it is. They're like, yes, exactly. That is the Black Mirror future you want. So there is risk in building the thing. It's like, yes, and finally, you made it. But I do think, just to say out loud, it's like, I do think that designers often feel that they are naturally put into or have to adopt an antagonistic view toward the business. That our colleagues in other areas have their own incentives of what success looks like. And for us, that looks damaging or intolerant or dismissive of the user and their concerns. And I think that the goal, it's just such a cliche now, is rather than argue about the solutions, is to agree on the problem. And that one of the things that we can as designers, that I think can be a really core skill of ours, is to name the problem. We often don't do it enough with our colleagues. And I think that the real sign of success with design, interaction design, all of the stuff is how do we take the user's interests and the business interests and find that narrow hidden path that connects the two and light it as brightly as we can. Like, I think that is our work. And I think that asking those kinds of questions right now, when there's an emerging technology, when there are powerful business interests that are trying to push a certain vision, is to realize, oh yeah, we all do have agency in our own ways, especially in these early days, to demonstrate how this stuff should be used. Veronika, just like you were saying, the technology will decide for us if we don't decide for it. And the future should not be self-driving. It is up to us.
Or the money decides. Yeah. So we're running way over time, but it's been a fascinating conversation. I think we could go on for ages. Our little pre-chat that was meant to be a sort of quick half an hour thing went on. We talked for ages too, which is, I think, a sign, right? I think it's a good sign that there is a lot of conversation that needs to be had here. And I really hope that people are start to have these kinds of conversations in the environments they're working in. The show is named Power of 10 after the Eames film Powers of 10, about the relative size of things in the universe. And so the final one question is what one small thing is either overlooked or could be redesigned that would have an outsized effect on the world? I go for you, Josh, and then give Veronika the last word.
All right, that sounds great. She always should have the last word. We talked about something in the book called casual intelligence, which is just a reminder that not all of this stuff has to be a wholesale change in what we do. Not everything has to be, all right, the interface now has a total mind of its own. It's doing its own thing. And so there's this idea of casual intelligence of what if we just made this one little tweak a little bit better? And I just think forms, the bane of all of our existence, especially longer multi-stage things. You mentioned it, with kind of Gov UK affordances, forms are awful. What if we can sprinkle a little bit of intelligence into those? And I mean, Veronika, you've got a favorite example that is not a new one, but is machine learning in an interface that does that.
Yeah, Google Forms, when you start to type a question, immediately changes its interface to reflect the type of question you think you're going to ask. So it'll change from multiple choice to a linear scale type of thing, depending on the phrasing of your question. And I think that's just a beautiful little example. It's so unintrusive. It's so easy to override as a user, but it just saves you a little bit of time, and it makes the form building a bit easier. And so, yeah, as Josh was saying, just the idea of casual intelligence and just adding smart but not overweighted intelligence into experiences, I think could be super powerful.
Amazing.
And in that example, it doesn't impose the answer. It's just, the default is ready for you in a smarter default than it was before.
But it's not clippy at the same time.
Right.
Exactly, yeah.
It doesn't have to yap at you, right? We just so important as a takeaway. Intelligent interfaces don't have to be talking interfaces.
Yeah. Wonderful. So where can people find you both online?
We are at bigmedium.com, where we share ideas, and we have a newsletter. It is an occasional newsletter, probably all too occasional, Veronika, I would say. But that's out there. And Veronika, you are also reluctantly, but very much so on LinkedIn. Is what's left to us.
I'll put the links in the show notes. Thank you so much for being my guest on Power of 10.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. What a treat.
And if anyone would like a discount off the book, if you go to rosenfeldmedia.com and use the code SentientPOT, you'll get a discount when you order directly. You've been watching and listening to Power of 10. You can find out more about the show on Polane.com, where you can also check out my leadership coaching practice, online courses, as well as sign up for my irregular newsletter, Doctor's Note. If you have any thoughts, please put them in the comments or get in touch. You'll find me as Andy Polane on Blue Sky, LinkedIn, YouTube, or you can get in touch with my website. All the links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time.